guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Welcome back to the Amazing Plant Project. My name's Ren, and today we are doing an analysis of Lane Paul's book, The Bees. Now, I'm going to say, right, I have not read either The Hunger Games or The Handmaid's Tale. However, I have seen commentary about both of them, seen the film adaptation of at least the first part of The Hunger Games, and I have some friends who have discussed certain elements of both. So, that being said, the book describes itself as a combination of the two, but slightly different. So, just keep that in mind when we're going through stuff. So, The Bees is a character-driven and plot-driven storyline that's an adult fiction novel written by Lane Paul and was published in 2015. And if it looks like I'm just kind of looking to the side here periodically, that's where the notes are, so also apologies if there's audio feedback from my laptop. That's where the notes are. Also, this might help, it probably won't, but we'll see anyway, because lights. Okay, there we go. And for some reason, my mic isn't being recognized by the computer, so I can't record external audio, so it's just on the camera right now. So, anyway, the book is described as a mix of The Handmaid's Tale and The Hunger Games, but like with bees. So like, as in all the characters are bees. And from what I've heard of both of those stories, that is an accurate description of the storyline. The story itself is pretty engaging and well written. However, when you start describing insect society in a manner that you would describe human society, with all the intricacies and court politics and intrigue and all of that, it can get real dark real fast, so also keep that in mind while we're going through this. Okay, so in the plot, right, in The Bees, we follow Flora 717, who is one of the sanitation worker bees, from the time that she emerges from her hexagonal pod, however you want to call it. Each of the hexagon structures in the comb is either for storing honey or pollen or an incubation sort of chamber for young bees, that sort of thing. So she's emerging from her little section, and we follow her forward through life. Now, she's rather more independent and stronger and braver and resourceful and everything than most of the other orchard bees. And depending on how the characters are written, that's either more or less of an issue. Now, for the storyline, right? Flora, because in her own head, she's Flora. To other bees, she's either 717 or Flora 717, depending on who's talking and if they even deign to use an actual name for her, because she's one of the sanitation worker bees as a designation, and not treated the best, we'll say, by pretty much anyone who is not also a sanitation worker bee. So, we're following Flora through her life. And for anyone not familiar already with bees, with bee society and dynamics and everything like that, once bee larvae have matured into adult bees, they have to kind of chew their way out of the capsule that they're in to protect them as they're developing. Also, bees naturally change roles over time. So, as stated in, there's a tree hugger blog post, which will be linked down below, but, quote, "Bees change jobs over the course of the year as they grow from young bees to more experienced ones, and the seasons change." So, what that means is that as the bee develops, as the hive matures, because there's a lot of bees that die off in the winter, that's how it seems to go, there is a progression in roles that the bees play. Now, in the storyline, that is restricted to Flora herself. None of the other bees have that mobility. So she is the special outlier, essentially, for the entire society. And most of it can be explained within the context of the story and intrigue happening in the court, for lack of a better term, which I won't get into so much because spoilers, but that is an underlying theme throughout the book. For Flora, through her dedication to the hive, her commitment to maintaining and protecting her fellow bees, she gains respect from those in higher rank. Mostly. There's the highest of ranks still looks down on everybody else because reasons. But most, if not all, of the others start to look at Flora as, if not a leader, then at least an equal. Which you can kind of get that feeling in the first couple of chapters, so it's not so much of a spoiler. It's like, now, in the micro-universe of the hive, because all of this is taking place within the hive or within a bee's range of flight around the hive. So, within the micro-universe of the hive itself, all the bees carry the name of a flower. Or a plant, really. So we've got the highest rank, that's the sage, that are the priestesses, and traditionally the queens of the hive. We've got the teasel bees that are kind of the nurse bees, protecting and taking care of the eggs and the very young bees that haven't developed into what are known as bees. Just the larvae stage, essentially. We've got the thistle bees that tend to be the guards, to the point that the thistle guard is the category that patrols the landing board of the hive. And again, if you're not familiar with bees very much, there's generally a landing board at the front of the hive. Now, if it's a box hive, it's the white boxes that you see along roads sometimes. If someone has brought bees to an orchard, especially. Or, those are the ones that you usually see in shows where bees are featured or where beekeeping is a component. The only one coming to mind, admittedly, right now is Cain in Supernatural. So, bees. But towards the bottom of the box, there's a little hole in the box so that the bees can enter and exit. And there's a little ledge that's usually just about, like, I don't know, inch wide, a couple inches across, that's tacked to that so that the bees can touch down after they've been out foraging and rest before going in. Or have a jumping off point to survey their area before setting off. And it allows the defense to be present if be present if they're required, and it allows any kind of, like, if there's a bee that has been contaminated by something, or if there's a bee that's sick, it allows them to land outside of the hive without contaminating the rest of the structure and the rest of the bees in the structure. Also, I'd totally forgotten, but of all the shirts that I have, I figured Sherlock, who is rather obsessed with bees, was a good choice for today. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. So, all the bees have a flower name, or a plant name. Some of the drones have names for linden and quercus, so oak, that sort of thing. But they all have a species name. Except for the florids. Because flora is just a general flower. They're the lowest rank, the lowest caste. They have literally no voice because they've been sealed by generally the higher ranking bees because their voices are not valued. They're seen as expendable, so if there's a mission that requires a certain sacrifice, if you will, they're more likely the ones who will be sent out to do whatever it is. So, that being said, the depictions of violence and death are, from what I'm aware, rather consistent with how bees and bee society operates. And there's the queen who lays eggs, there's the drones who are really only there to mate with the queen to produce more eggs, who don't have, or the drones, rather, don't have stingers, they don't forage, they just are there and eat the resources. They get killed off when they're no longer useful to the hive, and things like that. Wasps kill and eat bees whenever they can get a hold of them. So do spiders. So bees are highly complex, beautiful creatures. But if you're seeing that world from the point of view of a bee, it's terrifying. Like, seriously. So, there's over 20 different bee designations represented by the flower naming strategy, which I'm not going to go into here, but I'll have the list on the blog post that's going to correspond to this, so that will be linked down below as well. Also, I realized that the manner of consuming media changes how you perceive it. So, I'm just putting that out there, right here. I ended up listening to the audiobook format, so I've noticed that if there's anything that's like very visceral battle gore type content, that's something that I need on a page or screen. That's not a good thing for me to be listening to unless I've gone in search of it, because I do listen to like horror stories sometimes, paranormal things like that, or the occasional podcast, whatnot, but I have to be in a very particular headspace to want to do that, and was not prepared for this. So I'm gonna just put that right there. Going back to the naming, the worker bees having the flower names and the drones having the tree names, because that tends to be how it broke up in the story. It might have a connection to the ongoing narrative that only the queen is able to reproduce, and the forager bees only love the flowers that they visit, and those are the only bees that routinely leave the hive aside from the drones. It might also be a symbolic sort of connection to the drones not really being of benefit to the hive, aside from being potential mates to queens in the surrounding vicinity. As trees are not overly known for their flowers, and the flowers are the source of the food and the source of survival, essentially, for the hive itself. So the worker bees go out and find the flowers, and they're radiant, and they bring home the pollen and nectar, versus the drones that might contribute something sometimes. Now, I realize that different trees have more or less that would be going for them in that capacity, but as a general, there is that. Likewise, the trees are more hardy plants versus the flowers and herbs that tend to be seen as more delicate plants. So you've got the masculine, strong, and the feminine, delicate, weak. It is interesting, though, I will say, that the biological importance, if you will, is kind of subverted through the power of friendship, which quite liked to see. That's a good twist in there. Won't say who or what happens, but there's a thing. And especially because it adds character development and progresses the plot at the same time. So, bonus points. So, yeah, again, if you go into the story expecting there to be graphic depictions of death and violence from the perspective of the creatures going through it, you'll likely be more prepared for the plot and the elements within the plot than I was. There's also a repeated theme of psychological manipulation and trauma, in addition to physical violence that I was not expecting. But it is in line with what I know of how bees operate with certain scent markers. So there is, because we're following flora, right? Because we're following flora, we, the reader, see the direct impact of certain psychological manipulations on her as a character. So I'm just gonna leave that there so you know going in. And again, it might have been a different perception of the story if it had been in print form as opposed to audio form. But I know that any kind of like trance, meditation, whatever, hits really fast, it's very easy for me to go into that kind of altered state. So, I don't know if that impacted how I was perceiving the story or what, but having that type of situation used against characters had a very visceral response. It is somehow less traumatic to hear animals attacking other animals versus humans attacking animals. The same kind of way that humans attacking humans versus humans attacking animals. But when it was presented, much of the time, it didn't feel like it was bees being described, even if it was like mentioning the wings or extra limbs or something, which I know was to reinforce that the characters are bees, they are not human, but it's still there because the characters were so well developed that you could relate to them and work within that sort of framework. But for much of the reading, there were some like downtime periods, right? But for much of it, it felt like I was listening to a horror podcast because there was so much death and so much pain and uncertainty and gore and just... So, if you would like to read this, just be prepared for graphic depictions of violence and gore and mentions of torture and fear and loss and pregnancy. That's part of it too. Loss of personal autonomy. Infanticide. Mostly perpetuated by bees on other bees. I don't know if I would have had a different response, a different reaction to it if I'd read it as a text instead of as an audiobook, but it's been several days since I read, or since I finished the audio format, and I still have the very vivid depictions in my head, which is a credit to the writing and the ability to develop the reality in the story. However, so I commend the author for being able to create such vivid depictions that are so heavily detailed, especially within the microcosm of the hive and its surroundings. Likewise, there's some very heavy topics that are addressed, and everything from what I've mentioned to the effects of pesticides and the loss of available food sources on the bees, and even old human customs that interact with bee populations. So overall, it was very well done, and it was able to elicit a very visceral sort of reaction. However, you also have to be in a very particular headspace in order to read the book and not have a negative response. So, while I appreciate the story for what it is, and am fairly sure that I have friends who would be interested in it, and would be able to engage in the content better than I can, I ended up giving the book 3 out of 5 stars. So yeah, reading and reviews is an entirely subjective exercise, I realize, and I'm sure some of you might have really enjoyed it, some of you might not have. Leave a comment down below if you've read the book, or if you know of anything else that is bee related or generally plant related. I don't know if you've seen them already, but I did a book review last week for 3 different kids' books, so I will link it up in the thing and down in the description below. If you're not already... Oh, just keep slapping things. If you're not already aware, I do a Botany book club on Mondays at 4 p.m. PST or GMT -8 at twitch.tv/adventurin. Again, will be linked down below. Currently, we are reading Braiding Sweetgrass. We're going to be doing part 2 next week, so Tending Sweetgrass. And it's basically 50 pages per week, so for the next month we're going to be working on this. And yeah, that is about it. If you have any book suggestions, whether it's botany or botany adjacent or just in general, let me know. I'm doing the botany and botany adjacent ones on this channel, and then anything else that I'm reading is going to be on the Adventurin channel, which again will be linked below, along with all the other social medias and everything. The Patreon is down there if you'd like to participate. On that note, thank you, Rob, for your continued support on Patreon, along with the folks over on Twitch who are supporting stuff, so y'all are awesome. And I put out content, so far it's the same stuff that is available on YouTube, but I put it out there a day or 2 early, so there we go. So yeah, if you would like to see what gets posted next, hit the subscribe button down below and the bell icon next to it so you're notified when I upload. And yeah, I will see you next time. Have a good one, everybody. Bye now.